Here we are. Good evening, everyone. Sarah, it's good to see you. Michael, as always, we listened to you over the conference you did last night. Eitan and Andrea, how are things in Texas?
Things are good. Warm weather. Sorry, y'all.
Leslie, how you doing?
Doing okay, thank you.
I also see that Heather, Howard, and Kayleen are here. I just press the record button and we'll start momentarily. We still have a few people coming in, so it might be a minute. So this is the continuation of a course we've been doing since the summer. Why be different? An introduction to Judaism. Another person just came in. I'm sorry for missing last week. I was, I don't know, intermediate COVID or something. Who knows? I wasn't feeling well, but I'm all better at the moment. We will meet again next week because we need to do a class about Passover before Passover. And we missed last week because I wasn't feeling good. And so the only time we have to do that class will be next Wednesday. So there will be 2 classes, 2 weeks in a row, but then we'll be off a little bit for Passover. And in May, we will do the final installments of the course. We'll talk a bit about the state of Israel. We'll talk about conversion and what conversion involves, and we'll talk a little bit about the American Jewish denominations and what they were, where they're going, and trying to make some sense of things. The topic tonight is kind of depressing. But it's a large part of the ritual life of the Jewish people and part of the life of everyone, the rituals that involve death, dying, and mourning. Let me see if I can fill the screen with this. Whoops. It's over here. Those of you who've been here before know that it's okay if you have a question to stop me in the course of while I'm talking and ask for clarification. If otherwise, I'll stop about halfway through and we'll collect ourselves and talk, and we'll also have a period for questions at the end. The first plan, the first thing that we try to do is to try to live as long as possible. The present world is the world where Jews play, and we want to stay in the game as long as we can. Very famously, we know that the preservation of life trumps just about every ritual we have. If it's a question between saving a life and observing Shabbat, it's a no-brainer. The most serious ritual responsibilities that we have, such as fasting on Yom Kippur, if it endangers health, we don't do it, because health is paramount. Life is very precious. And we do as much as we can to stay in the game. And that includes a responsibility to take care of ourselves, to try to be as healthy as possible. When you talk about things like smoking, that's considered to be impermissible halakhically. Drinking is good, it brings joy, but we should try to drink in reason. We have responsibilities, and it's good to it's good to live as responsibly as we can. Given that medical technology has caused us situations where we recognize that the drive to stay alive, that the quest to preserve life can increase suffering, can put people in positions where they could be really hurt. And because we recognize this is a possibility, we do permit advanced designations, which can be made to guide family and doctors about desired and undesired life-saving procedures. In general, in most cases, you are allowed to withhold medicine. If something is considered to be a medical intervention, the person has the autonomy and has the ability to say, well, I don't want this, even though I recognize that not having this could endanger my life. And as we get older and as we worry a bit more about losing control, these questions tend to loom a little bit larger. And it's certainly good to have a conversation with loved ones to make sure that they understand what we would want to do. And we have, I have available, and I could share with you documents from the conservative movement, which will guide people in writing advanced declarations that conform with Jewish law, in order that we can have those. Just because it's kind of in the topic, not exactly what we're talking about, but a very important mitzvah, the possibility of donating our organs post-mortem. That we generally have a principle that we don't dissect the dead. We don't, it's called the Nevel Hamet, the cutting of the dead. We don't do it, but again, saving a life takes priority. So we're permitted to do these things in order to save lives. And the cornea is considered to be a life-saving donation. If it permits somebody who can't see to be able to see, we can see how that could make their life possible. So we do have, it's considered a mitzvah to donate our organs. And again, if you're looking for forms and the structure to do it halakhically in terms of Jewish law, those sorts of forms are available. We had a larger conversation a while ago about transplant donations. One of the people watching tonight is a transplant surgeon, so maybe I'll ask him to talk to us a bit about the importance of this at some point. But this is an important thing. But this is Plan A, and the problem with Plan A is that it works until it doesn't work. Things have a way of catching up with us at some point. So before we go to Plan B, I'm going to be using a couple of words over and over again. And I just want to make sure that people know them, so it won't be like I'm talking nonsense or anything. You'll hear the word sometimes goses or gosesis. This is a person who's about to die, and we've decided that there's nothing we can do to stop it, that it's futile to continue treatment, and that death is imminent, immediate, and inevitable. And when somebody reaches this stage, all we do is we stay with them and we provide whatever comfort we can provide for them medically. But it's a recognition that we can get to a point where we're not going to seek to prolong life, that you can only do so much, and that at a certain point that point is going to be reached. We don't refer to the person or after they die as the body or the corpse. We have a very particular terminology, and this terminology is mate or meta. So when I refer to the mate or the meta, I'm talking about the body, but I don't use that term. It's the way that it's considered to be the way to refer to them. I would say we're putting the mate into the hearse, or we're going to carry the mate to the grave. This is just the way that we tend to refer to it as Jews. So we get to Plan B. Despite our best efforts, the fund falls through and the rent comes due, and somebody has passed away. The principle that at the moment a person passes, the priority from that instant on until they get buried is for that person to be buried as soon as possible. And this responsibility falls on the relatives. We help them. I mean, we don't, we don't leave them alone. We help them do it. But halakhically, it's the responsibility of any children, siblings, parents, or the spouse to bury the mate or the meta as soon as possible. They're excused from all ritual responsibilities until this takes place, because the one thing that they need to be focused on is the burial of the mate or the meta. And this comes under the category of something we called kavod hamet, the honor of the mate, or the caring for the honor of the deceased. When somebody dies, they are no longer able to control their appearance. I mean, they're able to protect themselves. And so we are obligated to protect them as much as possible, to protect their honor. The main way we express this is to bury them as soon as we can, that the earth is considered to provide protection against them having to visibly decay in front of other people and therefore be dishonored. So the primary means that we honor the dead of kavod hamet is that we bury them as soon as possible, but this has other implications. It's not our custom to display our dead. We don't have a viewing of the mate or the meta. If the loved one wants to look and say goodbye or be with the mate or meta, that's completely fine. But we don't allow the public to see them, because the person is unable to control the way that they appear. And we want to protect them. We want to protect their honor. Now, kavod hamet can cut in different ways, because part of it is societal concern. And we'll talk a bit about this when we talk about burial. But our preference as Jews would be to have no casket or coffin whatsoever. And this is the way that it's done in Israel. We put the body in shrouds and we put it directly into the ground. Because we live in a culture where that could be understood as dishonorable, where everyone gets a box, and people might think that we were barbaric, or that we didn't care for our dead adequately if we didn't have a box as well. So we permit coffins, as long as they're poorly designed and bound to fall apart as soon as possible. We permit them, but this is a matter of how kavod hamet can cut in a couple of different ways. Or for instance, you have the obligation to bury the person, the mate, as soon as possible, but it might be seen as unseemly or dishonorable if none of the family was there, because they're coming from a long ways. And therefore the kavod hamet could argue for delaying the burial for a little bit, and in which case you have to take steps, refrigeration, or we have like a trough with we put ice in order to preserve the body, to arrest decay until the moment that burial can take place. We do not permit embalming under any circumstances. That's considered to be forbidden, because we believe that the entire body needs to be buried in the way that it is at the moment of death, that we can't discard part of it, and embalming necessarily involves discarding part of the body. So that's considered to be forbidden. But the overriding principle is kavod hamet, the honor, taking care of the person who has passed away, who cannot care for themselves. And this responsibility, though they should have the help of the entire community, falls on the immediate relatives, the children, the siblings, the parents, and the spouse. Just part of the procedures, I think many people are familiar with the procedures of Tahara and Tahara, but just to review what we do, all of these things come from the Middle Ages, and we don't look at death the same way as moderns as they did in the Middle Ages. But in the Middle Ages and presumably in antiquity, the belief was that the soul lingered in the body for some time after death. That there's sort of a trial. The grave is considered to be the punishment for the soul, and the soul is ultimately liberated from the body after some suffering. But it doesn't. Our feeling was not that it takes place instantaneously. So, in order to provide comfort to the soul, and in order to purify the soul, we have this ritual of Tahara. And this is the cleansing of the soul, which is understood to be resting in the body. And so for Tahara, we physically clean the mate. And this is done by members of the community. It could be done by family members, but we usually step in to help. We don't usually, we step in so that they aren't tasked doing it. But this is not done by professionals. This is considered to be something done by society. It's called the Hevra Kadisha, the Holy Society. And we clean the mate first with soap and with water. We scrub it the best that we can. It's men only work on men, and women only work on women to preserve the modesty and to preserve the dignity. And after we have thoroughly cleaned the mate, we immerse it. Either in some communities, it's placed in a mikvah itself that's at the Jewish funeral home. More common is that there's a mikvah from which we take water from, and we pour the water over the mate continuously. We'll take 3 buckets, and one person will start at the head and go down, and then while they're still pouring, the next person will start, and while they're still pouring, the third person will start. And by this way, by having water continuously poured on it, we'll accomplish immersion. We'll accomplish immersion, and this is the heart of Tahara. We believe that just as a woman can be purified after her cycle and prepared to have relations with her husband, I mean, just as any way the mikveh is used for purification, we use it to purify the soul of the dead. There's some confusion. Some people think that we're purifying the body, and that's actually impossible. That's actually impossible. That the body, a dead body, is the greatest source of impurity that is known to Judaism, and it can't be purified. And this is why if you go to a traditional Jewish funeral, you'll see some people standing outside, and there'll be a speaker, and they'll be broadcasting. Those are Kohanim that aren't going into the chapel because they're not permitted to be inside a building with a mate because of the impurity that they would be exposed to by doing this. So the body itself cannot be purified, but we believe we can purify the soul through this process. After Tahara, the mate is dressed in tahrichim, which are white robes, and they express the purity of the soul. And they also express our sense of equality in death, that everyone gets the same costume, that we don't have different levels of outfits when we leave this world. When we come into the world, we all come in as equals. We're all naked. When we leave the world, we're in the same outfit. We don't take anything with us. And this is also expressed in countries where a coffin is used, like the United States. Everybody tends to use the same coffin. That we tend to use the same box. This is a plain pine box that is not designed to last very long. But unlike other, we don't want the case where people should feel like they have to honor their dead by buying an expensive box for them, because that's vanity, and it's also a waste of money. The funeral and the burial. The funeral for Jews is very basic. It could take place in the house where the mate lived when the mate was alive. It could take place in the funeral home. Less commonly, it will take place in a synagogue. And the funeral consists of the recitation of a few psalms, and we prepare a couple of eulogies. And The eulogy should capture what made the person special. The eulogy should connect them to the people that are left behind, and the eulogy should connect them to the Jewish tradition, to God. It's in rabbinical school, they tell you that you write it, you look down, you look across, and you look up. You talk about the person, you connect them to their family, and then you connect them to God. You connect them to the tradition. It's considered respectful to keep things brief. 10 minutes or so is an adequate eulogy. You cannot be comprehensive, and there's a danger because people feel like they want to do as much as possible to honor the person. They try to be more comprehensive than you really can be, and that's not the it's not the point of the eulogy to tell the entire life story. We just want to bring across the things that that we're going to remember this person for, that they're no longer with us, the things that made them special, the spark of life, that was in them. And so we don't tend to go on as much as other cultures might. The body is then placed in the earth, and it's covered in earth by relatives and by the community. It's considered to be a great act of love to provide this protection. And finally, when burial is complete, from the time of death to the time of burial, the focus has been on getting the mate protected by the earth. When that is done, the focus moves from the responsibility of the relatives to bury the mate to the responsibility of the community to care for the relatives. And for up until this point, the relatives had this great task. They had this responsibility. They were excused from everything else to do. I mean, now they're excused from everything else, but they don't have a job anymore. Their job is to sit and be sad. And our job for the community is to take care of them. This is kind of the there's the second part of this is mourning customs and those things, but this is a reasonable place, I think, to stop for a second and to see if there are any questions or to see if there are any comments.
Well, if nobody's going to speak, I will. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I knew I could count on you.
And I find Jewish funerals and burial ceremonies to be incredibly beautiful and moving. And that's my comment, really. That's really all I want to say. They are just very beautiful prayers.
I agree with that. I find them very comforting. And part of what I find comforting about it is that it's relatively the same for everyone. That it's one that's a tremendous. I think it's a tremendous relief to the family, or it should be when you see the larger society. And I'm not speaking about Jews or non-Jews. I'm talking about everyone who has moved past the idea that we're going to be ruled by ritual, and to say that we're going to design we're going to design on our own what we're going to do. We'll call it a celebration of life, and we'll put this item in, we'll put this item in, and then we'll do this. And that has to be the most stressful thing in the world. And I just when my father passed away, it was terrible, but we didn't have to think about what was going to happen because we knew it was going to happen. It was there was no thinking involved. It was just calling people and having whatever need to be arranged. And to me, I think that's very comforting to the families. I find it comforting, and it's comforting to see us. I mean, we see our common humanity in that we that we're doing the same thing for everyone, for ourselves, and for the high and for the low. I think there were some comments in the text that I'll try to recover. Does anything change in the process if the family is unable to bury the body sooner? What happened for COVID? Things became very complicated for COVID. We basically were not permitted to do Tahara and Tahrikim personally because of liability issues, mostly, that we couldn't expose people to the risks involved in that. And that is just something that's beginning to be recovered now. If the family is unable to bury the body sooner, we dance with that, but it's painful sometimes because the family's they're in suspended animation. I mean, there's another chapter to this that we're going to talk about next, Shiva, that cannot begin until burial takes place. And so if there's a long delay, the family is suspended. They don't know what to do, and the community doesn't know what to do because we're ready to jump in and to do Shiva, but we can't because the body hasn't been buried. So that's a challenge that, and it happens sometimes. It's not unheard of for there to be a significant delay at times for the body to. Yes, we do. I mean, it's a community responsibility to care for the to care for the relatives of the people after the burial, and I'll get to that in a moment. I'll just stop here again for another 45 seconds or so and make sure there's no questions about anything I've said up to this point.
I actually did have a question about burial in a Jewish cemetery. I know that you typically hear people say things about, not about having tattoos being a bar to being buried in a Jewish cemetery, or, lack of circumcision, things like that. What are sort of the requirements in order to be buried in a cemetery? And is that true about the tattoos and things like that?
Well, the main requirement is to be Jewish. We believe that Jews should be buried together. And for interfaith couples, usually what we do is we have another section, because there's the Jewish section has to be the Jewish section for those people who chose it. You can't go back to the people who are already buried there and ask them if it's okay to change the rules. It's so we accommodate interfaith couples in a different section, but the main requirement to be buried in a Jewish cemetery is to be Jewish. There's the tattoo thing is very famous, probably the best episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm ever. But it's
Yeah.
It isn't true. There's look, we bury sinners. We're all sinners. Most of us have sins that are far more serious than getting a tattoo. There's this story. The tattoo thing is about what happens when you try to make things up to discourage people. Because Jews were told for generations, well, don't get a tattoo. You won't be able to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And it worked. It scared people right until they found out it wasn't true. And now everyone has a tattoo. So we screwed that up. The reason you Jews don't get tattoos, you should say we're Jews. That's just not the Jewish way. We have our own things that we do. But there's
riding motorcycles too, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
What about your brother's tattoo of
the
Western Wall? That's pretty Jewish.
My brother's gonna be happy to hear that he has a bunch of tattoos.
We can't all get into medical school, Eitan.
Yeah.
I've never heard of a case of somebody being excluded. The questions come, well, if you want to do something interesting like have your non-Jewish spouse buried next to you, or to be cremated is another thing. We have a section in our cemetery that we accommodate that. Cremation is against Jewish law, and so we don't have it in the main cemetery, but we make accommodations in the other part of the cemetery to do. And the bottom line too is that every cemetery has its own rules. I mean, in New York, it was I mean, this idea of like having a vast community Jewish cemetery was not the way that it was. Every like union had their own little thing. I mean, over there, like the cobblers, the cobblers were buried here. The sewers were buried over here. It was, that was part of the benefit of unionization. You joined the union and you joined the burial society. And they had every burial society had its own rules to do. So the cemetery can always decide, but generally you just have to be Jewish to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And with that, I will sail on to the next piece of this. As I said, at the moment of burial, the responsibility moves from the relatives to bury the mate to the community to take care of the relatives. And the first 7 days following burial is the period that is known as Shiva, or just the 7. And for 7 days following burial, the relatives, the same group, children, siblings, parents, the spouse, are forbidden to work or to venture out from the home. There are different customs as where they stay. I mean, sometimes they stay in their own homes, other times they'll stay in the home of the mate, of the deceased. The care of them, which we're talking about the food mostly, is the responsibility of the community. I mean, we're supposed to they should not be cooking, they should not be cleaning. If anything needs to be done around the house for them, we step up and we do it. We do services in the family home so that they don't have to leave. Their job for the next 7 days is to sit and to be sad and to mourn. The greatest gift that we can give as the community is our physical presence. And traditionally, and this will be observed differently depending on the circumstances, but traditionally we are not to initiate conversation with the mourners. That when you go into Shiva, when you go into the home for Shiva, you drop off whatever you need to drop off in the table, and you go and you sit down next to the relatives of the deceased, of the mate, and you just sit there. If they decide to talk to you, if they decide to talk to me, of course I can talk to them. I can talk back to them. I'm not supposed to ignore them, but I'm not supposed to initiate conversation, and I'm not supposed to try to cheer them up. And this is something that's very difficult for our society because we're very impatient with mourning. We feel that sort of like the healing needs to begin right away. And it's the insight of the tradition that when you and your dad just died, your mom died, you just lost a sister, God forbid you lost a kid, you just need to be sad for a while. You don't need to start the healing process, or if there is a healing process, it starts by being sad for a little bit of while, rather than trying to be cheered up or to have the mood lightened. Culturally, this is very difficult, and it does create some tension between different communities. Because I've been to Shiva homes in Bangor and on Long Island where they post on the door the protocols of Shiva are going to be followed in this home, and they write them down just so that people know that that's what the expectation is. Because if those aren't there, I think that people are going to be more willing to be more sort of like our culture, which is like, oh, come over, hey, how you doing? Here, let me hug you. Let me try to comfort you. That is the natural response. That's the natural response, but it's the insight of the tradition, I think, that the natural response kind of works against the larger purposes of the mourning that needs to happen. You know, I can only speak of my own experience too. When my father died, it was very comforting that I did not have to really talk to people, that people would just come. I was on my little stool, which I keep in my office to think about it. But as I sat on my little stool, and they would just sit by me, and they would just be there. And that's really all I wanted. That's really all I could take. That's really all I could do. And maybe you can offer to, would you like some food or something? Could I get you a drink? That's fine. That's not really initiating conversation. But the gift that we bring to the Shiva home, we take care of the things that they need to, so that they don't have to cook, so that they don't have to clean, and we do not let them be alone. We sit there with them. And as I said, this is the sort of thing that how closely that is followed is going to depend on the portion of the Jewish community that you are in. But that's the traditional point of view. Shiva is suspended for Shabbat and festivals. And this is a very interesting feeling. I'll never forget the feeling. You know, I wear tennis shoes probably more than I should. I don't like to wear leather shoes, but the leather shoes are in antiquity were considered to be a comfort. So in Shiva you can't wear leather shoes. The Friday night when Shiva was being suspended, and I put on my leather shoes to walk to synagogue. I was never so happy to have leather on my feet, even though it was only going to be for 24 hours. When the sun went down again on Saturday night, I was going to take them off again. But it was the mourners in the shul, you go late so you don't talk to people. They recognize you. You sit apart, and it's really quite an experience. But if a holiday comes, there's the problem that there might not be that much Shiva at all. If somebody dies like 2 days before Sukkot starts, and they're buried the day before the holiday, there's not going to be any Shiva. We had a Gabbai in our community whose mom died right before Sukkot, and he had we did Shiva in the cemetery because the burial was on Friday afternoon. The holiday was starting Friday night, and the only time we could do it was right there, right after the burial. We set up chairs in the cemetery. They sat down, and we sat with them for a while. So that's going to be a little bit complicated, but that's part of it's part of the thing that the community knows how to do. We're there to lead. You don't have to think about what to do. It's just you're directed by what's going on. After Shiva, relatives of the mate are permitted to return to work. They are not to attend entertainment or festive occasions, and you don't really want to. You don't want to laugh. You don't want to watch a sitcom. If there's financial loss involved, we have to think about it, and we usually permit it. Like, God forbid, there's a death in the family a week before a bar mitzvah or a wedding, and you can't cancel things. I mean, because it's all been paid. It would be a huge financial loss to move it. We make an adjustment in that situation. But so this period is 30 days shaloshim from burial. And it's from this period you're permitted to return to work after Shiva, but you're expected to not participate in entertainment and frivolity and things that are fun. And for the period of Shloshim, the clothes of mourning are worn. I had a vest that I tore, and you can't. And I would just put the vest over whatever I was wearing, and people would see that it was torn. And when people see that, they know that this person is not in. You don't come over and talk to him about the hockey game necessarily, or you know that this person is on a journey, that this person is. I was actually on a flight during Shloshim, and I had my torn vest on, and a flight attendant came up and like was engaging in small talk with me. Another flight attendant came up behind her, like touched her and said, wait a minute. Just this is, he's not in a place for this. He's not in a place for this. And I just felt so protected by that. I really felt like I felt protected by that, that I wasn't required to have the levity and the lightheartedness that I was impossible for me to feel at the time. For all categories except for one, Shloshim is the end of formal mourning. Now, mourning goes on for the rest of our lives. We're always mourning. We never stop the process of missing the people that we love. And that's and it isn't like throwing a switch that, well, my Shloshim is done, I'm going to head off and and do karaoke tonight. It takes time to get back into things, but the 30 days is kind of the standard period, and you do. I think that these. I mean, I can only speak for myself. I think that the time limits that are placed, they intuitively made sense to me. When the 7 days of Shiva were done, I was ready to get out of the house and do something else. I couldn't sit there anymore. And I wasn't completely ready after Shloshim to get back to life, but I was kind of ready to like start, dipping my foot in maybe a little bit. The exception is children mourning parents. And for children mourning parents, the restrictions of Shloshim last for 12 Jewish months. And this is every loss is terrible, but it's the insight or the idea of the tradition that when a spouse dies, it's terrible, it's heartbreaking. God forbid a child dies. I can't think of anything worse than that. But until your parents die, you've never been in the universe without your parents. That is considered to be a primal and the most grievous. From that point of view, it's considered to be the loss that puts us in one of the more psychologically fraught positions, and most of us sadly have experienced that to some degree or another. That it's a long haul. Mourning a parent, and mostly we always mourn them some way, but the character of the mourning is transformed. There's a requirement to erect a monument, a matseva, to the deceased where they are buried. There should be a marker, and that marker should be placed as soon as possible. And in our cemetery, the stone takes a while to do, but we immediately put a metal plate with the name and to mark where the person is buried. And we try to get the stone up as soon as possible. The dedication can happen anytime after Shloshim. Typically, the dedication is done a year after burial. And this dedication is called the Unveiling. And this is a very important, a very meaningful opportunity. One, because it often allows, if there's out-of-town relatives, it's a year later, it's possible for them to plan to come back and to attend and to gather. But it's also a transition in mourning around that time, that a lot of the grief, a lot of the intense grief has given way to just the larger picture, being comforted by the memory of the person more than being anguished by their passing. And the talk that I give at the Unveiling it reflects this. I do not speak of the afterlife at the funeral. Or if I do, I do so perfunctory, because I don't think that's, I just don't find that comforting at that time. And I don't think it comforts that much. But a year later, when we start to recognize the gifts that the person has left us, when we see the life that has continued to nourish us, and we see that the role of the person going on in the world beyond, beyond their life. It's a time to be more hopeful. And I do at the Unveiling often speak about our belief in the afterlife. And though this is not going to be a class in the afterlife, I did like a 27-part series of that last year, more than anyone needs to know about the afterlife. It's all on the website. It's very good stuff. Maybe it was only 4 parts, but we don't, because Judaism is not a strong religion theologically. We tend to just grab whatever is nearby in terms of our speculation about the afterlife. So we don't have a strong doctrine about it, other than the fact that it exists. The rabbinic doctrine that we pray about in all of our prayer services 3 times a day, 4 times on Shabbat, is bodily resurrection. That God is powerful, just as God is powerful to bring down the rains, God is powerful to bring up the dead. And if he decides to someday, he will restore the dead to their bodies, and the dead will live again. And though we don't know that that will happen in our days, we believe that that's the nature of God, that can happen. And so that's considered to be a sign of hope. Some people don't look to the resurrection of the body. They look to the survival of the soul. There are Jewish teachings about heaven. There are Jewish teachings about hell. There are Jewish teachings about the dead, where the dead are really dead. There are Jewish teachings about reincarnation, etc. Because we don't have a strong theological sense, because we're more halakhically, because we're more behaviorally inclined, we don't have dogma on this. But it is not true, as you will hear in some quarters, that Jews do not believe in the afterlife. I have to do an asterisk. I mean, the Reform movement at some point in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, said, we no longer believe in the afterlife. And then they changed the prayer book to strike any mentions of it. So, but that's, they can't speak for Judaism any more than I can. It's the tradition speaks for itself, and the tradition is full, is abundant with teachings of hope, but also teachings of fear about what is past this world. And to learn more from that, I would commend to you my 4-part class on Judaism and the afterlife that's on the website. And I'll take this question here, and then I will entertain any other questions that you have. I was pretty disciplined tonight, under 50 minutes. That's not bad for me. That's is Shiva permitted of a non-blood family? Family's family. It's blood is not the point. If you're, if you're adopted, if you have a relationship that's not biological, but if you have a relationship that's familial, then all of the family law rituals that would apply if it was biological would apply in that case. There's no requirement of biological relationship to love and mourn someone.
Rabbi?
Hi, Howard.
Yeah, hi, Rabbi. There was an interesting thing. When my father passed away, I was up in Caratunk and he was in New York. And I flew down, got the last plane out of Bangor. That was many, many years ago. It's called Northeast Airlines. And I went directly to the funeral home. And when I went there, there was a man. The body has to be, it can't be left alone. And so it's one of the big funeral homes in New York where they do thousands of funerals. So they have older men, I think, who maybe don't have a lot of money, and they pay them to sit with the body all night. When my wife passed away in Bangor, we belonged to Beth Abraham Synagogue at the time, and people volunteered to sit. There was sort of many different people volunteered to sit at night, friends of hers and so on. So you didn't mention that. I don't know if it's required. I assume it's a requirement. The body's not supposed to be.
No, the body can't be left alone, and that flows from sort of a practical imperative from the days before there was refrigeration. That if the body is left alone for any period of the time, there's the danger of infestation of pests. And so the Shomrim, they're called the guardians. They're literally guarding the body. But they're also fulfilling a spiritual function by saying psalms. In New York State, it's illegal to volunteer to do that. You have to be paid. So many rabbinical students, not me, because I lived in Philadelphia, but many rabbinical students would make a few shekels walking over to the funeral home on Amsterdam, Riverside. And it says if you had a few hours of the night, you could make $25 an hour reading Psalms.
And the other observation I wanted to make is when my wife passed away, Rabbi Isaacs at the funeral chapel took each of my children, cut their lapels or with a razor, and he told them, you have to mourn for either 11 or 12 months. 12 months, I guess it is. I thought he said 11, but anyway. And then he looked at me, cut my lapel, and he said, you only have to mourn for 1 month. The husband and I was in a state of shock. I mean, this was my wife. I lived with her, you know, and then I started to try to find reasons in my mind. What could this mean? And the first thing I thought was, well, my children are my wife. They have 50% genetic material in her. I have none. And then I thought to myself, maybe they want the surviving spouse to find another partner. And, you know, maybe, you know, they don't want them isolated for 12 months. I didn't know what the reason was for it.
It's considered to be appropriate to go through a full cycle of festivals before stepping out to find a new spouse. Even though Shloshim for spouses is only 30 days, it's considered unseemly to jump back into those things. But it is, I guess, I mean, if you just asked me without prompting me, well, we're talking about halakha. Is it, well, what's the worst loss that could happen? And I'd say, well, it'd be the death of a child. I mean, I think that'd be, I think that was easily the worst thing that could happen. And you would think that the mourning would be commensurate with that. But that's not the psychology that the rabbis are relying on. Their psychology is that the only way that I can understand it is the way that my rabbi explained it to me, which was to say that you don't know a universe without your parents until they pass away. I mean, there was a time when I was alive before I met my wife. There was a time when I was alive before I had children. Before my dad died, there was never a day that I didn't have two parents in the world.
And the last thing I want to say is that I read Rabbi Lamb's book on mourning, and he was head of Yeshiva, leader of Yeshiva University.
No, it's Maurice Lamb. The different Lamb, different Rabbi Lamb.
Really? He was at the Jewish Center. Okay. Well, anyway, in that book, he wrote that the tradition is that when a person dies, you light a candle at their head, at the head of the bed somewhere, and you open the window. And I know my wife died in Eastern Maine Medical Center, and my daughter, who's Orthodox, was there, and I knew what the tradition was, and I had a candle. So I asked the nurse if she'd mind if I lit a candle, and after she passed away, we were right there. And the nurse said, well, it's illegal to do it here, but she said, go ahead and do it. And then my daughter said, we've got to open a window. And I said, you can't open the windows in these rooms here. But I think my wife was smart enough that her soul could work its way out to the duct system. That's all.
Thank you, Howard.
Is that part of tradition that you have to open the window?
I've been in non-hospital situations where people have passed, and sometimes we have our minds to do that. Oftentimes it's we don't have it. We don't have the we just don't have it together to do it. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your companionship tonight, and God willing, we'll see you next week, and we'll talk about the granddaddy of them all, the Passover Seder. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.